for today, I do want to know about the Marvel Universe. I ain't gonna lie. I think I'm gonna skip the comic part. I do want to learn about the Marvel Universe. I do want to get into comics. In the future, I'm gonna like start buying comics and actually reading them shits. And I might hit up a friend because he's into like comics and shit too. So yeah, so that's why I put it in the title. I'm saying like, yo, what is Marvel? Like, honestly, bro. Like, I claim myself that I know Marvel, but do I really? Like, honestly. So, comics explained. It's going to carry most of the information and shit like that. The prices in general for everything's just crazy. That's what I'm saying, V2. Like, and I don't know how they still making these sales and shit. Like, some shady shit is going on, bro.
On, guys, this is Rob, and it's been a while since we made an explanation style video. And because we're coming up on the Fantastic Four, and we have a whole idea of like the
Oh, and like I said, some of these videos are going to be like 30 minutes or 20 minutes long. My bad. I just want to learn. I just want to know what, you know
multiverse
what I
going
mean?
into was it Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, I thought doing a video kind of explaining the history of the multiverse wouldn't be the worst idea. On the surface, the multiverse seems complicated. It's actually not. And if you know what you're talking about, you can do it in about 30 minutes. Right? So the first thing that I want to establish here when it comes to the multiverse in Marvel Comics is that traditionally, up until Al Ewing's run on Defenders Beyond and in his Ultimates run, we
Avengers
didn't
Beyond.
really have a true history of the multiverse. We did to a degree, but not really, right? In like Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, issue number 61, for example, Sage is explaining the nature of the exterminators in Marvel Comics. It was a whole extermination event and that kind of thing. But the bigger
I don't know what say who's Sage. And I just got done of like watching of a video about not the maker, but how he survived technically of making copies of himself because he was in Earth 6160 and Earth 616. So I really don't know how that worked, but it is what it is. I don't know. Apparently that's like part of the Ultimate series. Like it's like a new thing going on.
point is that she talked
Yo,
about the
boo, what's
nature of the
going on? Yo,
Celestials
Mirror,
and that
Marvel, my
initially there was
favorite.
only just the main Marvel universe. And then the Celestials,
Marvel,
essentially
bro.
dealing with this threat that they couldn't control, ultimately created the multiverse and then banished this threat to an alternate reality. At the same time, if we look at Fantastic Four issue number 161, which is really when the multiverse was first actually introduced in Marvel Comics, that three-issue story arc running into 164 kind of explains the whole idea of alternate realities. And of course, that's built on with Marvel What If, where Marvel starts exploring the idea of alternate realities. And the only real explanation there, if you want to call it that, is that all you have is the main Marvel universe, and every alternate reality is basically a branch off of that main Marvel universe. You guys are pretty much familiar with that because of like Marvel's What If. It's like, what if Bruce Banner never became the Hulk? What if Spider-Man never lost
Yo,
the Enigma Force
true.
from the Acts of Vengeance storyline, for example, when he was Captain
And the maker was doing that in 6160 in Earth 6160, bro, because he made sure that Peter Parker didn't get bit by the spider, the radioactive spider. Tony never became Iron Man. I think it was Howard Stark that became Iron Man. What else, bro? What else did he do, bro? It's some crazy shit. I don't know.
Universe. What if, Steve Rogers was never thawed out, right?
That's
And just stayed
basically
frozen in
what
ice for
the
however
maker
long.
did.
And for the most part, that
Oh,
worked.
and he
In
made Reed Richards as Doctor Doom. But he's also Reed Richards. Like, I don't know.
Marvel, right? It wasn't really a massive issue, and as the fan base, we kind of went with it. But then you come into the Ultimate Universe, introduced originally in the year 2000 with Earth 1610. There was no branch universe effect there. It's not as though the Ultimate Universe picked up with like, well, what if Peter Parker had gotten, become Spider-Man at a different point in time or something like that? Instead, it just kind of went off to the races. And so this really left a huge question, which is if this universe exists, but it's not based on the main Marvel universe, then how in the world do you tie it into the multiverse? And we started seeing more and more questions like that pop up as different alternate realities were introduced in Marvel that seemingly had nothing to do with the main Marvel universe. And so all this came to a head in Al Ewing's Ultimates. And Al Ewing's kind of the cosmic guy in Marvel, which is to say, like, whenever there's stories out there that deal with the multiverse, the history of the multiverse, all kinds of different powerful beings that are out there, Al Ewing's usually the dude who handles it. And so most of you guys are familiar with the story of the first firmament, but for those of you guys who are not, what Al Ewing did is he came back and he basically said there are a finite number of universes that exist in the multiverse that are never changing, right? Call them multiversal constants if you want to. Everything else is just a branch off the main Marvel universe. And this came from the first firmament. So the idea behind this was that the first firmament simply came into existence. We can largely presume it was created by the one above all, but Al Ewing never really explains that.
Wait, what is the one above all? Is that like the Beyonder, or is he like more powerful than the Beyonder? I don't know. I don't know who the one above all is. Because I just know it from the What If series. There's like this dude with a big head. I'm not talking about Modok or whatever his name is. The Watcher. Ain't he like a cosmic entity? Something?
What ends up happening is the first firmament creates life on its own. And for those of you guys who remember like the Ultraverse in Marvel, yes, it's very similar to the character of
There's
Nemesis.
multiple
But the
Watchers.
first
Yeah, I
firmament in creation
well, I kind of knew that, but like still like I'm talking about like that one. Like, is he the power scale? What I was trying to get at, like one above all, the Beyonder, the Watcher, the Gainer Fairy. Yeah, yeah,
creating
yeah,
life
for
saw
sure.
itself as a kind of absolute authority,
I
meaning
don't
that
know.
it believed it was the alpha and omega, the beginning and the end. It should live forever. And so, in creating these beings, it called them aspirants. And the aspirants were very dedicated to the first firmament. And so, what they would do is they would create life, right? Planets and stars, solar systems, galaxies, the whole nine yards. They literally filled in the first cosmos, which is the other name that the first firmament has, and that those creations that were deemed, I guess, unsatisfactory by the first firmament were destroyed by the aspirants and they would start over again. But there were some aspirants who believed that the very universe itself, right, the first firmament and every form of life within it, should understand growth, change, and mortality, that it should die and then be reborn as something new. And so these aspirants changed their physical appearance and started calling themselves the Celestials. And so what
Oh, so that's what they are, bro. Because okay, I was wondering what they are because after watching the Eternals, bro, which was ass by the way, I wanted to know who the Celestials are, but that's what hurt. Oh, so they got like they. Oh, so they basically did what Darkseid did because you know how he's like a thing, but he has an avatar and an avatar like he made a lesser version of him. It's basically what they did right here.
what followed was effectively a holy war between the
Crazy.
aspirants and the celestials, but it was a holy war fought on cosmic proportions. So where you and I, right, human beings wage war with, bombs and guns and tanks and so on and so forth. These guys were waging war on a universal scale. Entire planets were their weapons. Now, we never really got to see the ins and outs of the battle itself. It would have been cool if we had. But what matters is that towards the end of the war, the Celestials ultimately won by firing off a weapon into the first universe that shattered it into a multitude of pieces. Now, it is important to note that within the story itself, specifically, this is all happening in Ultimates 2, issue number 6 by Al Ewing, that the first firmament, as it's kind of recounting its history, says that it was shattered into hundreds of pieces, each of which spiraled out into a new universe. So it's not an infinite multiverse, at least not yet. And again, we'll cross that bridge here in a minute. What I do want to specify going forward is that technically the first multiverse is referred to as the second cosmos in Marvel, but
My bad.
I feel like if we start going back and forth, right, it's the second cosmos or the first multiverse, it'll kind of make things a little convoluted. So we're going to kind of get rid of the idea of like second cosmos, third cosmos, so on and so forth, and just call them like first multiverse, second multiverse, third multiverse. I feel like it'll be a lot.
There's different multiverses, bro. I thought there was only one. That's what? Yo, how big is the Marvel universe, bro? Because I know they had like a Secret Wars 2015, like when it comes to the comics and shit. Because there's like different versions of the Secret Wars. I know that for sure, and there's like different characters for each issue or some shit. So that's what I'm saying. Like, yo, I don't know, Infinite. That's why they got whatever. Oh, okay, okay. I gave up on. No, I've seen the first season, but I have not. Like after that, I gave up on that shit.
Easier to follow that way. And so what ended up happening is that with the first multiverse coming into existence, the Celestials did two things. The first is that they duplicated themselves and put a version of themselves in each one of these universes that made up the new multiverse. That's why there's different versions of the Celestials across every universe in the multiverse. Now, they're not all the same. This is one of the things that was established in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, for example, that in an alternate reality, you had the Mad Celestials, who were guys like Irish and the Judge, the ones that we know, but they had basically become drunk with their own power, and they had forced everybody in that universe to worship them as gods, presumably after destroying Galactus. We never actually saw that happen in their native universe, but the fact is, they ended up
Oh,
showing up in the main Marvel universe,
the Spider-Man games are setting their own universe. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, okay, I got you.
wanting to spread
That
across the
makes sense.
multiverse and seize control of everything. They were ultimately unsuccessful because of Franklin Richards. But the second thing the Celestials did is they created the Beyonders. Now, this was a change from Al Ewing, which is to say, from Secret Wars 1984 running all the way up until Secret Wars 2015 by Jonathan Hickman, we didn't really know a whole lot about the Beyonders outside of the fact that they existed in what was called the Beyondverse, this place outside of all space and time, and is the source of power for cosmic cubes in Marvel Comics. But in Secret Wars 2015, we got a little more meat and potatoes, where we learned the only real involvement that the Beyonders had in any significant, meaningful way across the entire multiverse was the desire to destroy it. Now, there is a whole motivation behind that, but I feel like if we go into that right now, it'll derail things. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But when Al Ewing came along and made this change, it's one of these things that split fans of Marvel Cosmic. Either they loved it or they hated it. And there are some that just still don't like it. But the bigger point is that the Beyonders were created by the Celestials because the Celestials realized what would happen if there were a war that broke out on the same level as it did during the first firmament's time, right? The Celestials going to war against one another, except now it wouldn't just be a war in any particular universe, it could potentially be a war on a multiversal level. And so the Celestials gave the Beyonders enough power that the Beyonders themselves could actually destroy the Celestials if they needed to. And so following
What?
this, the first multiverse honestly didn't
Why?
last very long. And it wasn't due to any kind of war or conflict or anything like that. It was more due to the fact that it was relatively new and just kind of wanted to experience what it would be like to end itself. And so it did.
But didn't the Celestials also make these bots like from the Eternals with superpowers? Like Icarus and whoever they are.
Right? And then in turn, it became the second version of the multiverse. Now, this is where Al Ewing basically set in motion the idea that when multiverses are destroyed and then basically come back into existence, that there's not really a reboot. It's not a fresh start or anything like that. In fact, what happens is everything from the previous version of the
So
multiverse
Marvel Lord
is
Stream, what's going on, Rihan? How you feeling, bro?
carried over into the next one. So it basically adds to itself over and over and over again. And so in the second version of the multiverse, the idea of good and evil was introduced, specifically the Lifebringer and the Anti-All. The idea being that they represented the eternal struggle between good and evil, right? Existence and non existence. And of course, basically the Lifebringer won. But what ended up happening is the Anti-All effectively shattered and then spread itself across the multiverse. And what this meant is it kind of introduced the notion that when a multiverse or a universe dies, in between its death and its rebirth is the great nothingness, right? The yawning void. You hear different names for it in Marvel Comics, but basically the place that represents like where Null the symbiote god comes from. No, it's not the same thing as Oblivion. And again, we'll cross that bridge here in a little while. But following
No,
this,
the goat. You know what's crazy? I just watched Thunderbolts today. Oh, for real? Did you mess with it or not?
You go into the third version of the multiverse that introduces archetypes. So good guys stand for this, bad guys stand for that. You go into the fourth version of the multiverse that introduces the idea of magic. And again, it kind of continues on until you get to the sixth version of the multiverse. And that was a multiverse that was based entirely in science. Yes, there were elements of magic that it carried on, and in a lot of ways, the way that Al Ewing presented the sixth version of the multiverse to us, it was almost like this blend between science and magic. But this is where Galactus comes
Ooh,
from, right? The space explorer Gallon. Now, there are other stories that dealt with the sixth version
it was
of the
I.
multiverse in Marvel Comics
Version.
outside of what Al Ewing had done during his Ultimates and Defenders Beyond runs, and that even predate his runs. A really good example of this is Adventures of the X-Men, which was kind of a
X Men
side-along
is goaded.
story to the origin of Galactus. And those of you guys who are familiar with my channel, you already know how this goes, so just bear with me here for a second. But a lot of you guys probably know the origin of Galactus, if for no other reason than just kind of poking around and doing your own research. But he basically came from a universe within the sixth multiverse. He didn't know why his universe was dying, and basically at the end of his universe, he ended up merging with the sentience, quote unquote, of the universe, and then was reborn into the next universe as Galactus. What
What?
Adventures of the X-Men did, and kind of coupling all this information with what Al Ewing did, is it introduced
I just need Marvel to make a Blade movie and then I'm done. Oh yeah, but what do we tell you?
this idea that what was actually happening was the Dweller in Darkness had basically fractured the Mcron crystal. And the example that I always like to use is the Mcron crystal is effectively a hallway of doors, right? Like each door leads to a different universe. And there's a lot of artifacts like that in places like that in Marvel, right, where you can access the multiverse through different ways. But the fracturing of the Mcron crystal couldn't be halted. And like a black hole, it was sucking in the multiverse. When Gallon merged with the sentience of his universe, it wasn't actually the sentience of the universe he was merging with. It was the sentience of the sixth multiverse that he was merging with. And that's why when that version of the multiverse condensed down and then basically exploded with a big bang, creating a new multiverse, there's a version of Galactus in every universe that exists out there. Now,
So wait, so hold on, bro. The sixth multiverse or whatever, bro. Apparently that shit blew up because, like they said, like once a multiverse like dies, it gets reborn or some shit. But it also caused another multiverse to form. Like what? Like what, bro? This if this shit keeps on happening, there's gonna be like billions of multiverses, bro. Like
version of
this
the
is
multiverse
crazy,
condensed down
bro.
and then basically exploded with a big bang, creating a new multiverse. There's a version of Galactus in every universe that exists out there. Now, again, this is
On
largely
this
conjecture.
multiverse, and no, I'm going to know what this Marvel universe is, bro. I need to know the history of the Marvel universe.
There isn't really anything
This
per
is only
se
the best guy that could actually explain it good than other YouTubers, bro. I'm gonna keep it about
in Marvel Comics that officially establishes this. But
infinite
we can
amount
just
of
kind of put the pieces
universes.
together, right, using our own lines of logic and whatnot to draw a pretty reasonable conclusion. And so, where this now takes us into the seventh version of the multiverse, while
Like
that
I see what is like what he's talking about, but at the same time, I'm not. Like you know what I mean? Like
does basically encompass
we know about the firmament and how they become celestials and celestials how they made another duplicates of them of the multiverses, but they don't act like the same and shit like that. And how we just got done how Galactus was born and how he's born in every multiverse and shit because of the sixth multiverse.
everything that you've ever read
This
in
is
Marvel
crazy. And
Comics.
the Beyonders, how the Beyonders are how they got their powers because I'm pretty sure Kang also became a Beyonder at some point. No, wait. Doctor Doom also became a Beyonder.
Leading up to Secret
What is
Wars
that?
2015, I want to stave off the conversation about Secret Wars 2015 for a second, and I want to talk about the nature of the multiverse and cosmic entities. Now, in Al Ewing's Ultimates, issue number 5, he answered a question that a lot of us had running up to that point in time, because while the first run kind of answered a lot of these questions and introduced a lot of things, it was the question of if this is effectively the new history of the multiverse, And there's not really any mention of cosmic entities in the traditional sense. So,
Mm.
eternity, infinity, different things like that. Had they ever existed in the multiverse leading up to its seventh version? And the answer is yes. In that comic, he specified that every single universe from the creation of the first multiverse going forward manifests itself as the cosmic entity eternity. Now, eternity represents time, and his sister, for lack of a better word, infinity, represents space. So between the two of them, they of course represent
Oh.
time and space. Now, we weren't really given specifics outside of that, but we can largely conclude that much like the main Marvel universe that existed in the seventh version of the multiverse, that eternity spawned a whole bunch of child cosmic entities. And so we're talking about guys like Eon, Eulogy, Empathy, Expediency. What can I say, man? Eternity has a thing for kids whose names start with an E. But
Oh
still, right? We
boy.
don't definitively know that, but we can just kind of
This is the seventh multiverse, mind you.
draw that conclusion. And so, with that out of the way, what I also want to do here is I want to take a second and kind of wrap back to our discussion about the nature of universes within the multiverse. So, again, most multiversal stories, like 99% of them in Marvel Comics, specifically outside of Al Ewing's run and whatever you happen to see in Dan Slott's Spider Verse, as well as Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers.
What the fuck? The Avengers turn into dinosaurs? Spinosaurus? What is this? What, like I know about the zombie shit, but like this is crazy. Is this not crazy?
You happen to see in Dan Slott's Spider Verse, as well as Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, and whatever other miscellaneous stories out there deal with the multiverse, most of them deal with the idea of an alternate reality that branches off the main Marvel universe. That's the entirety of What If. Right. So again, what if Spider-Man never lost the Enigma Force, right, during the events of Acts of Vengeance, when Loki pit the villains against the superheroes? And so taking the work that Al Ewing had done in Ultimates and Defenders Beyond and kind of bringing it again back into this conversation, the very notion of the fact that the first firmament shattered into hundreds of universes would indicate there are constant universes out there, which is to say, when
I blame all on the first firmament, bro. Because of that nigga, we got multiple universes, bro.
the fact that the
This is
first
all his
firmament
fault.
shattered into hundreds of universes would indicate there are constant universes out there, which is to say, when the multiverse dies, that the multiverse is reborn, and these hundreds of universes always come with it. Now, we don't know what all those hundreds of universes are, and outside of a story where the context just shows that it doesn't branch off the main Marvel universe, we don't necessarily know if that's the case or not. But that's where I want to come into the idea of the Ultimate Universe, because the Ultimate Universe did not branch off the main Marvel Universe. There was no way for it to have branched off the main Marvel Universe, and if it did, there had to have been some catalyst for it. Again, we're talking about Earth 1610 in Marvel. The original Ultimate Universe launched in the year 2000. I'll explain
Mhm.
why that matters here in a little bit. The important thing is that this effectively established that the Ultimate Universe is one of several universes out there that just manifests on its own. It will always exist. It always comes into existence in some capacity. It can be destroyed, and we saw it destroyed, and the maker's currently trying to recreate it in Marvel. But the fact is, right, that's how you reconcile these various universes that exist out there that have nothing to do with the main Marvel universe, yet somehow exist, right? It's the best explanation that we get. And so, following that, I want to go into the higher level cosmic entities. Now, these are higher beings like the Living Tribunal, guys like Oblivion, the Phoenix Force. The Living Tribunal and the
The
Phoenix
Phoenix
Force
Force.
are specifically interesting here, and we can largely draw conclusions with Oblivion. We'll talk about why here in a second. But with the Living Tribunal and the Phoenix Force, we don't really have a genesis point, which is to say, we don't know when they originated, like where they actually started. They just came into existence at some point. What also complicates things for its character is that in Strange Tales issue number 158, when the Tribunal was first introduced and encountered Doctor Strange, it specified that it existed to ensure multiversal balance, that no universe became more powerful than the others, and that the mystical energy that imbued the multiverse, so effectively magic, that it wasn't abused, misused, different things like that. But over
Okay.
the years, the role of the Living Tribunal has really fluctuated to the point that it doesn't really seem to have a purpose anymore. And the reason why I say that is because, again, in Al Ewing's work, he introduced the multiversal eternity, which is to say, if the multiverse could get up, walk around, and talk to you, it would be the multiversal eternity. And so,
Wait, do we know this from Thor? Thor Love and Thunder or some shit? Didn't he pop up at the last credit? At the credit scene or some shit? Yo, nah, this shit is crazy. Yo, I ain't gonna lie, bro. Duh, this shit is crazy. Because there's infinity and eternity, right? There's two of them.
anymore. And the reason
But they exist in the seventh multiverse though.
why I say that is because,
If
again,
I
in
remember
Al
correctly.
Ewing's work, he introduced the multiversal eternity, which is to say, if the multiverse could get up, walk around, and talk to you, it would be the multiversal eternity. And so, if that exists, what's the purpose of the living tribunal? And even to this day, there are fan debates all the time about who's more powerful, right? The living tribunal or the multiversal eternity. The living tribunal exists as an aspect of the multiverse, so it doesn't fall under the multiversal eternity. We haven't really seen multi eternity for a while, at least not that I'm aware of. And so we don't even know if it exists anymore. I have heard tell that the Incredible Hulk comics at the moment are dealing with a lot of that stuff, but I'm not really current on the Hulk. I need to get current. So, again, this information is based on what I know so far. But the fact is that beyond the Living Tribunal, you go into the Phoenix. Now, the Phoenix Force represents the sum total of all life that has ever, currently does, or will ever exist across the multiverse. It is immensely
Mm,
powerful. And in fact, within Al Ewing's Marvel cosmic hierarchy, his multiversal hierarchy, the Phoenix Force is actually beyond the Beyonders themselves. We did make a video that basically runs
what?
over the cosmic hierarchy of cosmic beings in Marvel Comics. So I'll post a link to that down in the description. Alex, please actually do it this time. Like, apparently, you guys have been complaining that Alex doesn't do it. I don't know. Alex, you're getting yelled at by me and the fans. But again, right? The Phoenix Force, it does have its own history. If you guys are interested, we can go into that.
What?
We can make a video about the history of the Phoenix. It's pretty chunky, right? So it's more than we can simply do in this video. If
But still, I might have to get into that shit because I thought the Beyond is like that can't be like touched. Like, you know what I mean? So is the Phoenix Force really that fucking powerful, bro? Yo, imagine. I'm getting ahead of myself because like it's kind of crazy. Like if we're getting Secret Wars and all that shit, bro, and if we get yo, Doctor Doom is cooked, no?
if for no other reason than the sake of brevity. But beyond the multiversal cosmic
I don't know.
entities, right? Because there are a few others,
I don't
Hawk
know.
God and different things
I
like
don't
that.
know.
Beyond the multiversal cosmic entities, you also have multiversal organizations. Now, not all these organizations continue to exist. Some of them are defunct, but there are two major multiversal organizations that have existed over the years in Marvel Comics that really had more of a hand in the progression of the multiverse than anybody else. The first is the Omniversal Development Court, and the second is the Captain Britain Corps. Now, the Omniversal Development Corps
Now we got corporations and shit, multiverse corporations. What about the what is it called? The TVA? Or no.
was
That's something different, I think.
initially led by a woman named Saturnine, or Saturnine, depending on how you want to pronounce it. She was the Magistrix, and the entire idea behind the Omniversal Development Court is that it would monitor every universe. And across the multiverse, around the same time, every universe should start to develop superheroes. So mutants should start to come into existence. Some version of the Avengers will form, some version of the Fantastic Four, so on and so forth. If that doesn't happen, then the Omniversal Development Court will go into that universe and initiate something called the push to basically jumpstart the evolution of that universe and get it caught up with all the others.
Oh,
Now,
so
the
they
most
put in
notable
work.
instance of this happening, and the only real meaningful appearance of the Omniversal Development Court was the Crooked World storyline, the Mad Jim Jasper story. Most all of you guys have heard of his character.
So
He
hold
was the
on.
and initiates
These
something
guys are like angels, no? What is it called? The Oblivion Omnicore Oblivion Corporation or some shit?
called the push to
That's
basically
what they look like.
jumpstart the evolution of that universe and get it caught up with all the others. Now, the most notable instance of this happening, and the only real meaningful appearance of the Omniversal Development Court, was the Crooked World storyline, the Mad Jim Jasper story. Most all of you guys have heard of his character. He was basically a guy who had wiped out all the superheroes on his Earth, which was Universe 238. The
Ooh.
Omniversal Development Court didn't know this. So when they went into his universe and initiated the push, it pissed off Jim Jaspers. He sparked the Jaspers warp, which literally started twisting the entirety of the universe in like a reality distortion tornado. And it would have infected the entirety of the multiverse had the development court not obliterated the entirety of the Earth 238 universe. Now, that goes into the 616 version of Jaspers, and again, we don't necessarily have to go into that. But the second thing here is the Captain Britain Corps. Now, the Captain Britain Corps is particularly interesting. It's actually really fascinating. Those of you guys who are familiar with the Green Lantern Corps from DC Comics, imagine that it's basically like the Lantern Corps, where they have basically lanterns that monitor different sections of space, sectors as they're called in DC. But instead of them being sectors of space, they're entire universes. And so you have a Captain Britain in each and every universe. You don't see
Oh
their stories all
snap.
the time, and you don't necessarily see them interacting on a multiversal level all the time. But when you do, it's pretty cool. A really good example of this is during the collapse of the multiverse in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, the New Avengers, and the idea that basically incursions were taking place and entire universes were being wiped out as a result of those Earths crashing into each other. During the events of Spider-Verse, Spider-Man UK, right, the Captain Britain of his universe, once Spider-Verse was done, was supposed to go back to his reality.
So
But
are
when
they
he did,
saying Captain Britain Court? Is that what they're saying? Captain Britain Corporation or some shit like that?
or at least
Am
when
I
the
hearing
doorway
that
was
right?
opened for him to enter, there was just a black void because his universe had been destroyed by the incursions. He just didn't know it. It was really, really fascinating, right? The Captain Britain Corps themselves actually dealt with the incursions as well. And we'll talk about what that means here in a minute. But the general gist of the Captain Britain Corps is that they are basically led by Saturnine, which is to say, like, they're almost kind of like an army. They were at one point the long arm of the law, for lack of a better word, for the Omniversal Development Court. Once Saturnine was kicked out and the court was effectively disbanded, that Saturnine just kind of became the leader of the Captain Britain Court in and of itself. And she would
Oh.
assemble the entire Corps in times of multiversal crisis. Outside of that, the corpsmen would just kind of go out, they would do their thing, they would report back to her if there was anything they needed to tell her in particular, and that was effectively it. But that takes us
What?
into Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. There are some elements of the multiverse that we are leaving out here. And so if there is anything that I have not covered here that you're interested in, leave a comment down below and I'll get to it as best I can. Plus, I love making videos that you guys find intriguing and interesting because I know all this stuff. Right. So I just love teaching you guys cool things. So as most of you guys know, right, the entirety of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, it was all basically caused by Doctor Doom, right? That Doctor Doom had basically learned alongside the Molecule Man that the Beyonders had basically created a Molecule Man in every single reality across the multiverse. Now, again, this is
What?
all happening before Al Ewing made the huge change with the Beyonders that they were made by the Celestials and all that stuff, right? So that has not happened in Marvel Comics. So at the time that Hickman was writing a story, the Beyonders were just some villains essentially out there in the multiverse, or at least in the Beyondverse. But the reason why the Beyonders had created these versions of Molecule Men across the multiverse was because they had enough power to destroy every universe that they were in. And the goal of the Beyonders was to blow up all the Molecule Men at the same time, just to destroy the
What?
multiverse, just to see what happens. It was just this grand cosmic experiment, such as it was
What?
when Doctor Doom and the
So
Molecule
niggas just want to kill niggas just because they just want to see what happens, bro? They was just bored. That's what that's what I'm hearing, bro. The Beyonders was just bored, bro. Like they was just like, yo, like let's just make this nigga, right? Make like the same dude in every universe. Let's just see what he does. If it doesn't work, let's just kill him, bro, in every universe, bro. What? That's basically what happened. Or that's what I'm hearing, bro. That's crazy. I don't know.
Man Owen Reese from the main Marvel Universe learned about this, they traveled to another reality and they stabbed and killed that version of the Molecule Man. What it did is it blew his universe up, but it basically created this kind of suction effect. I used to explain it as pushing the universe outward, but in reality, that's not the best way to describe it. What it was doing is it was contracting the multiverse. And so what it did is it sucked the
Huh? Why are you studying on this though you see a Marvel obsessed girl? What does that even mean?
universes that were
I
next to
don't
it
I don't know
into
if
the
I read
place
that
that
shit,
it used to
Rihanna.
be.
That
But
shit just hurt my
because
head.
nothing
What
was
does that
there,
even mean?
because that universe was destroyed, those two universes started moving
Read it
closer and
slowly. I don't
smashed
think I
into
will,
each other.
bro.
Their explosion had the same effect on the universes next to them. It was pulling them closer. And so, slowly over time, universes were crashing into each other and they were destroying each universe. Now, the way this worked was that
Yo,
Earth
you
was
know
the
we
incursion.
should do. Yo, you know what we should do, honestly, bro? If I was the Beyonder, bro, I would make. Nah, I ain't gonna lie. Rihanna, I was gonna say some shit, bro. I was gonna say some shit, bro. I ain't gonna lie, bro. But you my nigga, bro. So I
Point. So
wasn't gonna say
if
some
you
shit.
destroyed Earth in
I
one
was
of
gonna
these
say let's make
instances,
multiple
that the
Rehans and multiple universes, just because. And if one of them fucks up, bro, we're just gonna blow them up, bro. Like honestly, like in every universe, including this one.
universes would pass through each other. But if both Earths touched, both universes would be
Yeah,
destroyed.
that's
And there were
the
different tactics that people would take across the multiverse in order to save their
It's a joke,
reality. A
Rihanna.
good
It's a
example of
joke,
this
bro.
is that
I'm
was the
trying to learn about this
universes
shit, bro.
is
Come on.
it's what it did is it blew his universe up, but it basically created this kind of suction effect. I used to explain it as pushing the universe outward, but in reality, that's not the best way to describe it. What it was doing is it was contracting the multiverse. And so what it did is it sucked the universes that were next to it into the place that it used to be. But because nothing was there, because that universe was destroyed, those two universes started moving closer and smashed into each other. Their explosion had the same effect on the universes next to them. It was pulling them closer. And so, slowly over time, universes were crashing into each other and they were
Oh,
destroying each universe. Now, the way this worked was that Earth was the incursion point. So, if you destroyed Earth in one of these
oh,
instances, that
you.
the universes would pass through each other. But if both Earths touched, both universes would be destroyed. And there were different
That's
tactics that
currently what's going on in MCU right now, right?
people would take across the multiverse
The
in
incursion.
order to save their reality. A good example of this is that from Black Swan, as she was explaining it to the Illuminati, that Hank McCoy, Beast, in other realities, actually had the plan of evacuating Earth and then blowing the planet up in order to save the multiverse. It's considered a coward's way out, but it is a way to survive nonetheless. And so some Earths doing that actually survived the incursions initially. Then all that came to a head when Doctor Doom had essentially brought together all these molecule men across the multiverse in just a giant box, quite literally, and then
What the
confronted the
hell?
Beyonders by opening this box up. All these molecule men came pouring out, and when that happened, they detonated and destroyed the Beyonders, but then also obliterated most all of what was left of the multiverse. So those universes that had managed to survive after destroying their Earths, it didn't matter. They all ended up in the same place. And so the result of this is that Doctor Doom, using the Molecule Man, took the power of the Beyonders, created Battle World, and that's where you get Secret Wars 2015.
Oh, okay. This explains it how he became the Beyonder.
After destroying their Earths,
Heard,
it didn't matter. They all ended up in
heard,
the
heard,
same
heard, heard,
place.
heard,
And so the
heard.
result of this is that Doctor Doom, using the Molecule Man, took the power of the Beyonders, created Battle World, and that's where you get Secret Wars 2015. Now, the way that Secret Wars 2015 ended, we as fans all thought it was going to be a reboot. The way that Marvel wrote it, the way the story was told, it felt like it was going to be a full reboot. Literally, the story ends with the Molecule Man serving as the wellspring of power, Franklin Richards, the son of Reed Richards, crafting universes using this wellspring of power, and then Reed putting them back in the multiverse where they're supposed to go. After Franklin had provided all the life, energy, all the denizens and planets, stars, galaxies, solar systems, all that kind of stuff that would occupy this universe. And so we all kind of figured Marvel would just sort of go into it and say Spider-Man #1, Captain America #1, yada yada yada. Instead, what Marvel did is they said actually things are continuing on. Technically, it is the 8th version of the multiverse. but not really, because nothing meaningful changed, right? It all just kind of continued on. The only real things that changed was that with the Living Tribunal having been killed by the Beyonders during the events of Hickman's Avengers, New Avengers, that in an alternate reality, that version of Adam Warlock became the new Living Tribunal. Small little things like that. But again, all in all, it's not overly complicated, at least not for me. Hopefully it wasn't for you. I'm really hoping this isn't one of those videos where I tried to pack so much stuff into one video that it's just obnoxiously dense. Fingers crossed that's not the case. But again, if there
Sure.
is anything about the multiverse that I left out that you guys are really, really interested in learning about, let me know. Because I mean, there is the history of the
That that's crazy. So I followed like what was going on, how he explained it, because there's like literally an hour video of how to explain the history of the Marvel universe, bro. I don't know, yeah, like I think that's crazy to me how the multiverses are formed. I didn't know multiverses like there's like one, two, three, four, five, and six because in that multiple multiverse there's multiple universes and stuff like that. I ain't gonna lie. I don't want to say that's a lot to unpack, but it kind of is. But I was understanding that video though a little bit because there was some questions that I wanted answered, and he was able to answer those questions. So I I gotta go through a deep dive of Marvel, bro, because like I said, I'm trying to get into like comics and just into like more heroes and stuff like that, man. So that was some good info though. Some nerd shit, but that's some good info though. Shout out to Comics Explained, bro. He's always the go when it comes to this shit, bro. That's why I love him, bro.